Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and I'm continuing with my series about Germany 1918 to 45 for A level. So I was talking about the Weimar Republic and hyperinflation in 1923 because of the Franco-Belgian occupation of the Ruhr, when Germany was defaulting on its reparations payments, and the German government paid workers in the Ruhr not to work, because that would be assisting the French and French and Belgian soldiers. Anyway, the currency went into hyperinflation. That's lost so much value against world currencies. One can't print oneself out of a deficit. But anyway, I don't want to go into that too much. I'll come back to this a little bit later. But just summarising much of the 1920s, after 1924, the Weimar Republic, that's Germany, got itself a new currency, and the situation stabilised. There were loans from the United States under the Dawes Plan. Germany was specifically forbidden to use this money to simply repay the other Allied countries, principally France and the United Kingdom, but it was to be used to invest in Germany, to repair things, to buy new equipment, and that stimulated the German economy. Remember, when the war came in 1914, a lot of things which were due for repair or replacement were simply not done. A lot of these jobs were just put off till after the war, and then the war ended and they hadn't been done, and then Germany was broke and they were not done for years, up to 10 years. Things had not been renovated or replaced. Anyway, so by the mid-1920s, Germany was climbing out of the international doghouse. Germany was execrated for having started the bloodiest war of all time. Now, this blame is not entirely fair. Some countries were somewhat responsible as well. And as Germans pointed out, they had entered into peace negotiations under false pretenses. They said, well, look at Woodrow Wilson's 14 points of January 1918, and he said peace without annexations, a just peace, which said that's not going to cause another war, and so forth. And we signed the armistice on the basis that peace negotiations would be conducted along the lines adumbrated by President Wilson. The French and British riposted that we never promulgated the 14 points. That was propounded by President Wilson, and even the US government, Congress, didn't accept that. There we were. Or people would say, well, Germany was a military dictatorship until 1918, so the ordinary people can't be held accountable for the actions of the government. And that argument holds water up to a point. Anyhow, by the mid-1920s, people were becoming a bit more tranquil, a little bit detached from the situation of the First World War, because most people had experienced terrible grief. Most families had lost at least one person in the war. And so, understandably, there was fury and spite, but that had abated just a little by the mid-20s. So Germany's international reputation was improving somewhat, and the economy picked up. Unemployment was falling. It never fell below 10%. And by the late 1920s, it seemed as though the Weimar Republic might actually be a success. Gustav Stresemann had been Chancellor briefly in 1923, and he was the one who brought in this new currency. He was a member of the DVP, the German People's Party, and he was Foreign Secretary from 1924 to 29, and he was a pragmatist. He'd been against signing the armistice, but on expedient grounds, he then accepted Versailles. He was a monarchist, however, a republic had been set up, and again, he realised it was politique to simply accept the new dispensation. He had a policy of fulfilment by seeking to fulfill the Treaty of Versailles. He felt this would rehabilitate Germany's reputation and restore trade links, and through commerce the country would prosper, and through gentle diplomacy he could persuade the Allies to release Germany from some of its obligations. And this policy was somewhat successful in his lifetime. He was not an anti-Semite. Indeed, he was married to a Jewish woman. But some of the ultra-nationalists felt that he was a traitor for having accepted Versailles and the Republic and all the rest of it. Anyway, 1925 was a significant moment in German foreign relations. Germany signed the Locarno Pact, so called because of the city of Locarno in Switzerland, where it was signed. And you can see the hall where this momentous event took place. It still stands. Anyway, in this document, Germany accepted her western frontiers, that's to say with France and Belgium, and said that she did not accept the eastern frontiers, but would only seek to alter these by peaceful means. Now, this was quite honest of the Germans to acknowledged that they did not accept their eastern frontiers. They could have said that they did and then gone to war anyway, having got them to lower their guard. But this document was all the more credible for Berlin telling the plain truth that it would like some of its territory in the east back. Italy and the United Kingdom also signed this as though to be the honest brokers and vowed to punish anyone who breached this treaty. Were they really going to go to war over something which didn't directly concern them, the frontiers of Belgium or Czechoslovakia? Well, we shall see. Anyway, this paved the way for Germany being admitted to the League of Nations the following year. So in 1926, Stresemann was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and it would have seemed daft a few years before that any German would be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Germany's name had been mud, the country had been synonymous with bellicosity. A French journalist professed herself to be drunk with joy at the signing of Locarno because she was sure this guaranteed permanent peace. Unfortunately, Stresemann died in October 1929. Some people say that had he lived, the Third Reich would never have come about, but I think that's speculating a little bit too much. So I'm fast forwarding through German history just to give you an outline of the course. In October 1929, there was the Wall Street crash. That means the stock market in New York saw the share prices drop dramatically. Won't go into the long-term causes of that. The United States was the economic powerhouse of the world, and this had woeful repercussions for the rest of the world. It was somewhat a globalized economy, not as much as now. But nevertheless, this had an indubitable knock-on effect in other countries, chiefly Germany, and the United States was a major trading partner for Germany. So this period of acute hardship is called the Great Depression. Germany was heavily dependent on the United States for loans. Indeed, the Young Plan had been signed only about 6 weeks beforehand. That was a renewal of the Dawes Plan for a further 5 years, additional loans for the United States, from the United States to Germany, rescheduling of Germany's reparations payments, and so forth. Anyway, Germany was severely afflicted by the Great Depression. The United States was no longer extending credit to Germany. Countries put up tariff barriers, has echoes of what's going on today in the United States. So the following 4 years was a time of the deepest misery and despondency for the Germans. Unemployment rose to a shocking 30%. Think of that, 30% of healthy adults achieving nothing, producing no wealth, indeed using it up by eating, and they didn't get to do much of that. So that doesn't mean the remaining 70% were in a bed of roses. Sometimes they had their hourly rate of pay cut, or their hours cut, or working 4 days a week. They were often saving money just in case they lost their jobs. They were giving money or lending it to friends and relatives and so forth. So Germany had lurched from crisis to crisis in the early 1920s, and democracy had just about scraped through in the early 20s. But after 1929, many people had lost faith in democracy, even those who had been willing to give it a chance in the early 20s. People craved a messiah figure who was going to rescue them from their plight. The country was in a state of turmoil, and it seemed to be that the Weimar Republic was chaotic and feeble. So people who'd been otherwise middle of the road sought radical solutions. There seemed to be the need for a drastic overhaul to rid Germany of her many travails, such as mass unemployment. Inflation became severe again, not as bad as the hyperinflation of the early 20s. And so if you're an unemployed person, you've got loads of free time, not much money, what are you going to do? Now, not everyone's going to go to the library, go to a free gallery, wandering around town. Difficult to spend time without spending cash. Sometimes going to political rallies. There was no television in Germany back then. Only a few people had radios. They were very expensive. So one thing to do was to attend political rallies. This was free entertainment in the open air, or sometimes in halls. Particularly communists and Nazis were attracting lots of people to hear them, those who were not politically aligned. And these could be very alluring meetings. They were high octane. These orators had an answer for everything. They seemed to explain all the suffering that betided the German people, and they had scapegoats to blame. They offered very simple solutions, and that's very punchy slogans. The president at the time was a geriatric called Paul von Hindenburg. Now he'd retired before the First World War, been brought out of retirement for the First World War, won the Battle of Tannenberg and all that. He'd been elected president in 1925 upon the death of Friedrich Ebert. So he was a monarchist. He'd only accepted the presidency with the permission of the Kaiser, and he was not a political party man, but he was broadly conservative. Anyway, von Hindenburg felt obliged to invoke Article 48 of the Constitution, entitling him to rule by decree.